Welcome to another edition of Sideline Sanity with me, Michelle Tafoya, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Go to legacypminvestments.com, legacypminvestments.com. Find out how gold and silver can be a good addition to your retirement portfolio. Thanks, Legacy. We love you guys. Thanks for supporting us. This is a fun podcast coming up. I mean, I like to think that they all are, but this guy, Mickey Z, the guy that used to follow Noam Chomsky, a guy that used to be kind of a leftist activist, has found his way sort of out of that bubble and into a different state of mind. He hosts a podcast called the Post Woke Podcast. He's also on Substack under that title, Post Woke. He is a fascinating dude. Never went to college. I knew I liked him for a reason. And funny and so insightful with such an interesting background in history. You're going to want to talk to this guy. He kind of sounds, or you're going to want to listen to him. He kind of sounds like a beatnik who's turned clear-headed. It's really fascinating. Hear how he went from Occupy Wall Street to, I don't know if I want that vaccine in my arm. You got to listen to this one. Mickey Z is next.
For nearly 3 decades, she's reported the action from the sidelines. She started very young. She's covered the NBA, NFL, Olympics, and the college football and basketball national championships. And now, during these insane times in our world, Michelle Tafoya thinks we need a serious dose of sanity. This is Sideline Sanity with your host, one of the sanest people on planet Earth, Michelle Tafoya.
So welcome, Mickey Z. What's your real last name? I see it on Wikipedia, but I want you to say it.
It's Michael Zezima. And actually, my dad was born in Italy, and his relatives would say it's Zetsima. But
Zetsima.
Zezima when I was in school, and then eventually, because it's not the easiest name to remember, and I worked at a gym with a bunch of people named Mike or Mickey or Michael, so the Z just became my standard pen name, sort of.
Mickey Z, I like it. Born and raised in Astoria, Queens, if I'm to believe Wikipedia here. You appeared in a book with Noam Chomsky.
Yes.
What? Tell me about what I've got to know more, and I can't find more on my own.
One of my books that I wrote was published by a publishing company called Disinformation, which would be a little bit ironic in today's world, but this was about 20 years ago or so. And they put out a series of anthologies that were called Everything You Know Is Wrong, You Are Being Lied To, and they would contact authors who wanted to challenge the mainstream narrative in almost any topic. And Chomsky at the time was sort of at the pinnacle of doing that. And so I include him in my bio sometimes because even though I'm less than thrilled with his reaction to the vaccines, I still learned a lot from someone that challenges conventional wisdom like him. And it was cool to be in a book, the same book as him.
Well, he's an interesting character. How well did you get to know him?
Well, it's fascinating. I first made contact with him before the internet, and he was notoriously known for answering his mail. So I sent him, when I was much younger, I sent him snail mail and just said, hey, I've read some of your books. I had some questions, and he responded. And we ended up having a correspondence pre-internet. And then after that, I went to a couple of his talks and got to meet him in person. To say I knew him well would be an exaggeration, but my interactions with him were very positive.
You mentioned a minute ago that you were not happy with his response to the vaccine. I'm not sure what that was, if I'm to be honest with you. So what was his reaction?
He, the man who co-wrote the book, Manufacturing Consent, right. Hook, line, and sinker bought the COVID narrative. Mm-hmm. And when he was asked sort of tangentially on a podcast, it wasn't about the narrative, but he was asked what he thought about, I guess they were calling them anti-vaxxers even on that podcast. He talked about how they needed to be separated from society and that they were a threat and they should be put somewhere away from us. And the shocked host followed up with a question along the lines of, well, how will they live? Where will they get food? And he said that's their problem. And
Oh,
so a lot of people who once admired him were taken aback, to put it mildly.
yeah.
And I've definitely written and podcasted about it, but I always add in, it doesn't negate, you can't say it negates a lifetime of work that he's done. And he definitely played a role in just inspiring me to ask questions. And so I'm always grateful for that, but very disappointed in him more recently.
Well, yeah, because what he said avoided all questions. People who were just pure take the vaccine didn't ask many questions. So it's kind of ironic that he just bought into that. Your podcast, as I mentioned in the intro, is called Post Woke.
Yes.
What do you mean by that? Were you once woke?
Well, it depends on how you define woke, because since I'm mentioning being influenced by Chomsky, it might be obvious to listeners that I come out of what would be traditionally called the left. I think those lines are so heavily blurred and confusing now that I certainly don't call myself left or right or anything at this point. But when I was part of the left, and let's say 10, 12 years ago in the general area when Occupy Wall Street was around, the term woke wasn't popular, but it didn't mean necessarily what it means today. In fact, it didn't mean what it means today. It just sort of meant to be asking questions, challenging narratives, sort of anti-corporate power, questioning corporate power. We did things like march against Monsanto. And
Yeah.
so when I say post woke, I sort of went through that entire indoctrination and came out of it, what I hope to say, with a clearer perspective of what things mean to me. And, like anyone that's part of a group, there's a tendency to slide into some level of groupthink. And I won't pretend that I never did or that I can't do so in the future. We're all immune to that. But the term post woke to me means that just that sense of really clinging to your intellectual autonomy and seeking an internal compass as to what things mean to you and what direction and what actions you want to take.
It seems, Mickey, that's very hard for some people to do, that it's much easier to go along to get along, or to just say, yes, I agree. It's, as you mentioned earlier, it certainly happened with COVID and with the vaccines and the masking and all the things that we were told would be helpful.
Yeah.
Why do you suppose that's so easy for people?
Well, the dominant powers, the media, the Hollywood, they're incredibly effective at getting us to line up behind different narratives. And I think that this is a long time coming. What happened over the past nearly 3 years, in my eyes, didn't happen out of nowhere. It's a long time coming where there's social media in particular, where you have these algorithms run by artificial intelligence that sort of herd us into little tribes. And I know myself, when I was with Occupy, and I had at the time what Facebook lets you have 5,000 friends and you reach your limit and then you have followers. So I had all these people. And if I scrolled through my news feed, I could believe, and at times I fell for it, that, wow, everyone agrees with me. Look at this, one post after another, because the machine is only showing me the people who believe, who agree with me based on who I'm friends with, what I read, what I click on. And I think this has been a tendency perhaps since the TV age in particular, but the internet in general and social media in particular have created it that we unknowingly get herded into these tribes, and then we feel like we're part of something. That's why we're all in this together works so well, because typically we feel so separated and isolated. So we feel like we're part of something. Look at these people. I've never met them, but they're my friends and they all agree with me. And then you will defend that quite vehemently, even if that means denying reality.
This is fascinating. We're going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to ask Mickey Z how he did get out of that, how he became post woke. That's right after this. While we've watched the stock market do its thing, whatever that is, I mean, it's been a roller coaster, right? all that's going on, but gold has been on the rise. Gas prices are ridiculous, groceries, the whole bit, but you have options when it comes to your investments. You don't just have to invest in stocks. Gold prices are rising because investors are turning to gold for protection, and gold provides a hedge against inflation, protects against a weakening dollar. It's a good long play investment. Legacy Precious Metals comes in here. They are the only company I trust when investing in gold and silver. You need an investment that's going to protect your wealth in retirement. Like I said, a good long-term play. So if you think back to November or just 2008 in general, what was that now? How many years ago? Yikes. But at that time, I mean, things were in such disarray. Those who invested in gold saw really significant gains while others were losing their retirements. So while there is still time, maybe call Legacy Precious Metals. Find out how you can work gold and silver or other precious metals into your IRA, your 401k, your retirement portfolio. They can advise you on all of your options because they've got a great investing team. You can speak to an IRA expert at Legacy Precious Metals, 866-528-1903, 866-528-1903, or download their free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com, legacypminvestments.com. So, Mickey, you said you sort of came out of it with maybe a clearer mind, clearly a more independent thinker. How did that happen?
It was through rational questioning of activist tactics. I started to notice that when I was doing stuff along the lines of, let's say, animal rights here in New York City, that for a while there was a very active movement to end the carriage horse industry, saying it was cruel to the horses. And I've heard people eloquently disagree with that point, but I think there's some really strong points on the cruelty side too. And I would get involved in these groups. They would invite me to give talks about activism in general. And I realized as time passed that people didn't want to hear something along the lines of, hey, you've been doing this style of activism for so long and the results aren't coming in. Maybe we should try something new. And they say, oh, you think you know everything. And what do you suppose we should do? Just stay home. And the way they took it personally and the way they turned it around personally on me made me realize that it wasn't activism. It what became known as virtue signaling. It's a way of showing the world, hey, I'm a good person. I'm willing to stand out in 95-degree weather or freezing cold weather with a sign saying carriage horses are cruel or march against Monsanto and show the world how dedicated I am. And when I started asking, is this accomplishing anything? Because I don't see it. I see zero results. I became sort of outcast. And what was interesting is when the people that I thought were friends were attacking me personally for my just simple questioning, to go back to that point, is when something clicked in my mind that I felt less inhibited to speak out and to ask more questions. It didn't guide me into say like, okay, if I want to stay in this group, I better zip my mouth shut. It was like, no, there's something wrong here. And that's always been sort of a passion for me. Now I come out of I played sports in my life. If you're on a basketball court and you run a play 20 times in a row and it fails, the coach is going to say to you, we should run a different play.
Yeah.
I've worked in gyms my whole life training people. If someone comes to me and says, I've been doing this kind of workup, but I'm not getting results, the common sense answer is, well, let's try something new. And I sort of just applied common sense, was greeted with vitriol. And that space that was created pushed me into a space of asking more questions, becoming sort of a free agent then at that point, because I wasn't part of any group or ideology. But I'm so grateful in a way, some people that were awfully mean to me for asking questions did me a huge favor because they sort of snapped me out of the groupthink.
I wish that could happen to more people. I wonder if there's something about you and the way that you're wired or the way that you, maybe it's those common sense things from your life in sports or training that made you think that. But I had similar things happen during the COVID years when I said on Facebook or wherever, I'm seeing that this treatment, some doctors think that this could work in the early stages. And then this immediate onslaught of like,
People are like,
whoa, just
no,
it felt
stay
like a
away.
tidal wave of, you idiot, you stupid. Don't you know the studies have been done? How dare you? Yes, Greta Thunberg, how dare you ask such a question? And it was like, okay, and that's what really woke me up was I can't even ask a question without this kind of slapback. What the hell is going on? I just wonder, it seems to me there's still a great divide between those of us who want to ask the questions, who want to dig deeper and get second level thinking, and those who want to maintain the groupthink, like Hollywood, like academia, like politicians. How do we get out of this?
Uh, if I had that answer right now,
Yeah,
but
you'd be.
yeah, but I mean, first, let me say that I totally relate to you, where it's like you ask a simple common sense question, so you walk into a restaurant wearing a mask, but when you sit down, you take it off because COVID isn't allowed on the table. And, even if you don't ask it that sarcastically, what you get is actually frightening. It's so aggressive. And thankfully, you said, "Oh, this is going to make me ask more questions because now, if you're going to tell me questions aren't allowed, now questions are really allowed."
Yes,
and I do like to think, and I'm not. This isn't pie in the sky. It's from interacting with people that there are a lot more people like that. They just don't necessarily have a clear, loud voice on any social media. But and Substack is one place where you can find a lot more what they call free thinkers.
Yes.
But I think that what we need to do is this unique blend of finding more people who are asking questions and then sharing questions with them and talk and just feeling some kinship and solace that I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
But we can't alienate and isolate ourselves from those who aren't asking questions because that's just guaranteeing that there's never going to change. Yeah. And I find that's been a struggle for me for a while. I recently posted on my Substack that I wonder if what I'm doing here is beginning more and more and more to fall into the category of preaching to the converted, which again, there's some value in that because you don't want to feel alone. And when someone writes to me and says, "Oh my God, I read your latest article or heard your latest podcast, and it made me feel so involved and so not alone," that's a gift. But you say to yourself, well, how do we connect? And I think that's the direction to answer your question, for us to connect without these institutions, not expect Hollywood, the media, politics, academia to ever show us the tools that are going to bring them down. They're not going to do that. So how can we connect with people, our peers, and let each other know that we're not villains to each other and we have way more in common with each other than we do with either political party's politicians.
I'm beginning to see that more and more clearly every single day. You have written a number of books, 12, I think.
Yes.
Any of them now and I mean, let's see, you had Saving Private Power in 2000, The Murdering of My Years, Artists and Activists Making Ends Meet, A Gigantic Mistake, 50 American Revolutions You're Not Supposed to Know. I mean, it goes on. It's quite a list. Any of them that you think, that one, maybe I wish I hadn't written?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of them is about activism, and it was written before I started really, really dissecting the techniques and mindset of activists. So, for example, that one, I would say, all right, that no longer represents what I'm about. Okay. But in general, all of them have something that I find cringeworthy now. But I think that's awesome, though. There's a part of me that's like, I don't want to be marching in lockstep, even with myself 15, 20 years ago. Like, I like to think that I continue to expand, but they all have a theme, which is questioning narratives. And part of that, maybe part of that is because I'm primarily self-educated and I have the advantage of not being in ever going through a traditional like college indoctrination. So maybe that helped along the lines.
Yeah.
I had parents that were, even though we would disagree very strongly, they were very conservative with a small c, conservative,
Hmm.
but they were unconditionally loving and supported my curiosity and my desire to educate myself. And so I grew up in an environment that didn't punish me for asking questions. I went to 12 years of Catholic school with nuns and priests. And even then, you could still ask questions. At the end, there was
Wow.
always a point where the questions ended and you just was like, well, that's just how it is. You have faith and that's it. Like there's a point where the questions end and you learn that in Catholic school. But by the
Yeah.
time you're in high school and you start to have a little intellectual, ability, it's kind of fun to debate people who's are in that they're in that for life. And
Yeah.
so I feel like it's been a passion of mine. I enjoy it. I try to do it respectfully, but I think I have that background that enabled me from an early age to feel comfortable asking questions, but I'm still a human being. And as you mentioned before, when someone that you know and love comes at you because you asked a question, it's still pretty jolting and hurtful, even in 2022.
Wow. You in your podcast, the Post Woke podcast, you do a lot about the vaccines. You and I were introduced by someone, a mutual friend of interest, who is fighting against the vaccines or suggesting that they may not have been all we were told they were to be, and so on and so forth. How did that topic become so important to you?
Well, I have always tried to live a healthy life and take responsibility for my own health.
Mhm.
Um, and so I, and there's some luck involved because anyone can be struck by a disease or an
Sure.
accident. But I've been very fortunate to have not ever really used many pharmaceuticals or had to go to the doctor a whole lot. And I don't rush to the doctor for every symptom. So I contribute to not going. So it's been part of my life. And without even understanding what anti-vax means, to the best of my memory, by the time I became 18 or older, I don't know if I've ever had a vaccine. And that
Hmm.
would because I would just avoid medicines. It just seemed like the same way that if you were going to order a meal and there was a healthier meal and a kind of junk food meal, I would just order the healthier meal because that would be better for my body. I just never had a good feeling about them. So that foundation was always in me. But then when I sort of became a left activist, believe it or not, there was a time where questioning vaccines was a big issue on the left, where if you went to a meeting 20 years ago in some little place down in the East Village in New York City that was questioning, there was a group called Vaccination Alternatives. And I brought a friend there because she was pregnant and was wondering whether she wanted to have her child vaccinated. So I said, oh, I know where to bring you. It was a little clique of leftists for the most part, which is
Hmm.
so ironic now.
Yeah, it is.
So it sort of grew out of that. And then as I began to learn more, say from Chomsky, about corporate power and the corners they cut. And I mentioned before Monsanto, like
Yeah.
genetically modified products, which this jab is. It's genetically modified mRNA. So we used to march. I gave a talk at Union Square Park in 2014 to maybe 3,000, 4,000 people for March Against Monsanto, against GMOs, and about taking responsibility for your health. And the vast majority of those people don't talk to me anymore and all
Yeah.
lined up for the jab.
Yeah.
And so that is shocking to me. So I felt like once Operation Warp Speed kicked in, I started going back into my files of stuff about vaccines that I had written in the past, mistakes that were made during the polio vaccines in the 50s, the fact that no vaccine in history has ever gone from identifying a pathogen to being licensed and marketed and been considered successful shorter than 4 years, which was the mumps in the 60s. They tried a couple in the 70s and in 2009. I think they were like bird flu, swine flu, and they tried to rush them out to terrible results, and they had to be taken off the market. So I would share these facts with people, and some people would listen, but most people just lined up and got it. So
Yeah.
that's the long round ways that for me to say it's become very, very important to me that this seems to be a flashpoint, that if we could break through to people and make them recognize that big pharma is a profit-seeking institution like the rest of them. Even if you don't want to demonize them, just look at what their charter is, and you would say, by definition, they cut corners and they capture agencies like the FDA in order, like there's a revolving door. Someone could work at Monsanto 1 year and then be the chairman of the FDA with the next administration that comes in. And when you do a little bit of that homework, it's really impossible to hear about Operation Warp Speed and not respond with shock and passion and commitment that I said, I'm going to stay on this topic I like to think I cover a lot of ground topic wise, but you're right. I do focus on this because it feels so urgent.
Well, it is urgent and it's certainly timely. And I think you're absolutely right. What's fascinating, and I think there was a real political element to why people lined up for it. And you're nodding. If for people who don't see you, you're nodding. What happened, if we remember it correctly, was the pandemic hit when Donald Trump was in office. He was so hated by at least 50% of the country that whatever he said, people sort of went against. But he did start Operation Warp Speed. If people recall, it was not until after the election in which Joe Biden was elected over Donald Trump that the vaccines were okayed. Yeah. It was like within days after the election that the vaccines were released and said, these are okay. Now, suddenly it became your duty to be vaccinated. I mean, I talked to people who were just alarmed that my brother would not get vaccinated. Well, he's selfish. Well, no, you know, I'm not sure selfish is all that bad a thing when it comes to your personal health, first of all. And, you know, and the masking and all this, that people just lined up because now it felt like this was the Fauci was the sort of the anti-Trump, and his presence and whatever he said seemed to go like, you know, we're so against Trump, we're going to listen to Fauci and do whatever he tells us to do. How much truth do you think there is in that idea?
I think that you just spoke a whole lot of truth there because it points out two really interesting and contradictory parallel ideas. One is that Trump started Operation Warp Speed and to this day is running on that as an issue, saying, hey, there'd be no vaccine if it wasn't for me and everyone should get one. But yet the people who have the Trump derangement syndrome, who if he came on Twitter tomorrow and said that the sun's going to rise in the east, I think half the country for the first time in their life wouldn't believe it just because he said it. Like and I'm not saying that in defense of anyone. But it makes, there's no rational thought possible when you have that level of like deranged hatred towards one person. So that's bizarre. But then it manifested in them wanting to have the anti-Trump, which Fauci stepped into that role. And he's notoriously done that going all the way back to the 80s and 90s with the AIDS crisis. And his record there is horrendous. Yeah. And I would encourage people to just look that up. And I also interviewed Celia Farber, who was a journalist at the time and is still an amazing journalist, who was on the ground covering it for Spin magazine back then. And Fauci, I don't know how much I could say here, but he should be behind bars. That's my...
well, you're not alone in that thinking.
But then I can speak from experience living in a liberal city like New York. People who walked around without masks were assumed to be Trumpers. It was actually that black and white. Yes. And so to virtue signal, the greatest virtue signaling tool in history, you literally wear your virtue on your face. Look what a good person, look how unselfish I am. Look how much I care about you. And nobody said, hey, do these masks work? Like, I've asked people, have you ever looked it up? And of course the answer is no. And they'll say to me, oh, when did you get your epidemiology degree? I said, you don't really need one to type words into Google because so I think I feel pretty confident saying I agree with everything you said, that it was this perfect storm, which perfect storms very rarely come around in politics that aren't planned in some way. And in which somehow they got Trump to start the vaccine and still be proud of it. But it became this dividing point of who's civilized and who's not. But I think, I really firmly think that these powers that shouldn't be way overplayed their hand. that they thought that we were going to just surrender way easier and then ease into that whole World Economic digital ID and all that stuff, which they're still trying to work on. And there's a whole lot of people going, wait, I haven't even gotten the jab. So you're not pushing me into this stuff. And I think they really, really underestimated a big chunk of humans. And that's been a source of hope for me, that people are doing their self-education. And, you know, it's become a joke to say when someone says, I'm doing my research, but it's true. It doesn't really take, I don't even know if research is the right word. Like research sort of implies a scientific paper.
Yeah, it's just like I'm looking stuff up.
Yeah, it doesn't sound as romantic. Yeah, but basically that's what it is. And I've listened to your guests. In fact, when you had John Stockton on, I loved when he said, well, I've been reading about this for years. He said, I feel like I've been guided to this because I have this information on the front burner because I've been reading about it. Then this crisis hits and I'm like, I'm the one who needs to speak up because I got this stuff at the tip of my tongue. Yeah. And I related to that. I just said, anyone who studied something, like what degree do you need at that point? Because we're not being paid to do this. Fauci's being paid. Yeah. He's the one pulling the purse strings for research all across the globe. So who gets funded? Who doesn't? These are valid questions.
Absolutely. They're valid questions. And to not ask them is irresponsible. And it's not the way that a free society should work, where we don't ask the questions. This is really truly fascinating conversation. I would love to have you back because you cover a lot of stuff that I'm really, really interested in. I'll plug and say that I'm going on your podcast soon, and I'm looking forward to that. But there's so many directions I could have gone with you today, but this has been fascinating. I'm so glad to talk to you. It's interesting to talk to someone who has come from one place and sort of evolved to another by asking questions. Yeah. It's an okay thing to do. It really is an okay thing to do.
Yep. Absolutely. And I know that that's your thing. It just get comfortable asking questions. Yes. Some people will be uncomfortable with it. So be it. But you do not have to surrender your autonomy and your faculties of critical thought. You're allowed to ask questions, and you'll be surprised where that takes you.
Perfect note to end it on. I'd love to have you back, Mickey Z. People can find your podcast, the Post Woke podcast. Just, put it in the search bar of whatever search engine you're using. Research it. You can find him with a simple bit.
Substack.com if there we go. Hand holding.
Yeah. Substack also great. I love that platform. It's amazing how it's exploding. And that gives me hope too. Independent thinking. He is Mickey Z. I'm Michelle Tafoya. This has been Sideline Sanity. Be brave and do good. Happy to talk once again with Charles Thorngren, the CEO of Legacy Precious Metals. You know, I think it still is confusing to people, some people, as to why a precious metals investment would be a worthwhile one, particularly at this time when they're thinking, I'm doing all I can to put gas in the car. Why is now a particularly good time? And we'll go from there to how small of an investment is worthwhile for someone.
You know, a great question. And I think the importance of why really comes into the fact that we have to save for ourselves, whether it's a little here, a little there, whether it's making it a plan and putting out so much a paycheck, whether it's making sure we fund our retirement account. We have to realize we are responsible for ourselves in the long run.
You mean that no one else is going to ride up and save us, on some white steed?
It ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. And anyone who's promising to do that is getting ready to take advantage of you in some form or fashion.
Yeah. And so if I'm an investor, a potential investor, and I'm looking at Legacy Precious Metals and I'm saying to myself, this sounds smart. I don't have a lot to spend. What would you tell that person?
I would say, do what you can. If you never start, you never get there. So the most important step you can take is saying, I'm going to take care of myself and my family. I'm going to make it a plan. I'm going to take action. I'm going to start in the way that's comfortable for me. That's the important thing. The first step is always the hardest. But once you take that first step, the second step is easier. And then you're moving. And then once you're in motion, it's hard to stop you. So that first step, most important step.
I always tell people they can call and talk to an IRA expert or check out the guide that they can download for free, the Investor's Guide. What is the number one question that you get from people who are first-time investors?
The biggest question I get is this right for me? That is the question.
And that comes from everyone. So everyone's asking the same, is this right for me? And yet we're all so unique. And yet it is a sound investment for just about any portfolio, isn't it?
It is. Even though we're all unique, that uniqueness is going to tailor the way we begin the investment. Okay. But we're all in the same situation. That's the one thing I think we seem to forget in today's society. Whether you agree with somebody or not, we're in this together. America is in this transition that we're in right now. We're dealing with the same issues. Some people like them, some don't. But we're all in it together, right? So the need is the same. How we prepare and how we invest is what changes from person to person. But we all have that same need.
It's a great point. And again, I encourage people to just make the call, pick up the phone. That step is always the hardest. I'm not sure why that is. In any kind of effort that you make in life, whether it's weight loss or exercise or investing some way to better your life, it always seems like that first hurdle is the challenge. But when they call, who are they going to talk to? What's going to be on the other end of the line for them?
Great question. You're going to speak with one of our customer representatives, and their job is not to sell you metals, right? We have a much different approach. We're going to answer all your questions. We're going to show you what options you have. And on the rare occasion, this isn't right for you, we're going to say, this probably isn't right for you. We have a gold company here, but I say it all the time. What we actually deal in is customer service. We want each and every individual that calls to get the answers they need to be able to make the decision that's right for them. And we want to do that in a way that's not pushy, that's not salesy. And that's what makes my team so special. We care about each and every caller. And we're going to show you what options you have, and then you get to make an informed decision. So don't be afraid of the phone call. It's the best thing you can do.
And this is why I am so honored and I feel privileged to be sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. They're the ones that I'm going to deal with. And I encourage you to pick up the phone, give them a call. Even easier, go check out their guide. It's a free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com, legacypminvestments.com. But as you said, Charles, pick up the phone. You're going to talk to someone who can answer your specific questions and get the ball rolling, get started, do something that is a long-term play for your family's benefit. Charles, it's always great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's always great to be here.